Hello, friends. The end of 2022 is here, and it's the time of year that everyone has their best of lists, what they've enjoyed most. And last year, I made it a list of 10, and I regret that because there were some great books that didn't make the cut that I still think about, that I should have mentioned. So this year, I'm doing 15 books, so my top 15 books. These aren't all the 5 stars. There's even some ones that I wanted to add to the list that I tried to keep it to 15. There's other ones that I could have easily added, but these are the first 15 that came to my mind. A little bit of give and take here, a little bit of, I pulled a couple out, put a couple in, put them back in. So there was some back and forth. This wasn't easy to make, but these are the books that I will think about and remember from 2022. So these are the ones that have stuck with me the longest. These are the ones that have defined 2022 for me. And in 2022, I've tried to be better about being more selective with what I read. So I try not to just catch on to whatever everyone's talking about or whatever the new craze is or whatever. And not to say that those books aren't good. Some of them just aren't for me. So I have a specific taste, and I'm trying to be more selective with which books I choose for my reading time, because time is precious, and I don't want to waste my time on something I'm not going to enjoy. I'd rather try something that I'm pretty sure I'll enjoy. So let's get this list kicked off. I'm going to try to start at the beginning of the year, and kicked off the year. I'm cheating a little bit here because I added the Nightmareland Chronicles by Daniel Barnett into this list. I'm also going to be mentioning a couple series, so it won't be just individual books. And yes, that is one out of the 15. I'm not counting them as multiple books in my list. So it's my list, and that's what I'm going to do, because it's what makes me happy. So the first one, like I said, Nightmareland Chronicles by Daniel Barnett. I was in the middle of this when we went into 2022, but it's again, it stuck with me enough. The last 2 or 3 books that I read in 2022 have still stuck with me. There was a funny story when I was reading Sleepwalking. I was for work. We have to get a physical every year, and they have to check your vitals, and you go in and you have to do the PFT test, basically your lung capacity test. And so I was reading this book while I was in the waiting room, and it was in a really intense part. And when I went in to get my blood pressure taken and stuff, the nurse was like, "Are you okay? Are you upset about something?" And I said, "No, I was reading Nightmareland Chronicles by Daniel Barnett in the waiting room." So that's the kind of reaction those books had for me. I'm still convinced those books will be adapted one day. That series is phenomenal. It is so good. Daniel Barnett, his writing is just next level. It's just special. There's something about it that just puts it over, and it just another tier. It is just that good. So you haven't read them yet. They're a collection of novellas, except for the 6th book, which is Lily, I believe the 6th book, which is out now, and that is season 1 has concluded. So you can go out and read them. The first few are novellas, quick, easy reads, not a lot of time investment. So if you're into horror or just good stories, then check them out. And there's a few scenes from that series that I can just see easily being adapted. Just the tension it builds, the atmosphere, those really dreadful feelings that you get just by reading this book. They would so great. I hope this series gets adapted one day, because it is so good. So my second book that I want to mention is GhostCityGirl. I read this, and it's by Simon Paul Wilson. I read this book when I had COVID last year on my birthday. So I managed to get COVID on my birthday last year. That was fun. So I had a lot of reading. I got a lot of reading done, and the GhostCityGirl was one of them. And it's a great mix of science fiction, horror, comedy, and a little bit of cyberpunk. The humor, I'm not big on humor because I'm a miserable SOB, I guess. But the humor in this one is really dry, really funny, droll humor that really worked for me. I love the story, really captivating, has a good mix of all the different genres. It just seamlessly mends them all together. And I love the story. I love the horror. I love the world that it builds. Just a great book. If you're looking for something like a cyberpunk horror science fiction mixture, a meld of all those different genres, check out Ghost City Girl by Simon Paul Wilson. I think you will enjoy it. A few of you have reached out to me who have tried it and said that you've all enjoyed it. So that makes me happy when someone, checks out a book that I enjoy and they say, oh, I really loved it. It's like, it makes me happy. So thank you all who've reached out about Ghost City Girl. And we did have a spoiler discussion for that. And I believe book 2 is in the works. So it's just one book for now, but I think more books are coming. So it's something to keep an eye on. The next book this is one of, if I had to make a top 3, this one would be on my top 3, maybe even number 1. This may be my favorite book. This one and another one on the list, really just neck and neck favorite book of the year if someone put a gun to my head, which is Gunmetal Gods by Zamel Akhtar. This book, it is just, have you ever read a book and you were in the middle of it and thought, Zamil wrote this book for me. Like, he wrote this book with me in mind. Like, he tailored this book for me. This is a book that was written for me. It felt like someone went out of their way, like plugged a wire into my brain for all the things I enjoy, and it pumped out Gunmetal Gods. That's the way this book sounds. It is dark. We follow 2 different characters, their journeys. There's a war going on. There's some very brutal scenes in it. There's some great, there's some Lovecraftian horror in it. There's some great action. There's some great explorations of what happens after the battles. I mean, we all talk about the battles and battle scenes and, all these epic things happening. But what happens after? What happens after when the dust settles? What happens to the people who are left over after a city is taken? What happens to those people? What do you do with them? How do you manage? How do you maintain control? If you're an invading army and you take over a city or a castle or whatever, a village, what do you do with those people? What do you do with them? Things like what do you do with the people who surrendered? What do you do with the prisoners? What do you do with the royal family that you're trying to take over? All those different moments really stuck with me and really made me think, and in ways that fantasy hadn't before very many times. So it was just a different type of perspective that I don't think I've gotten before Gunmetal Gods. It is up there with one of my favorite all-time books. It is that good. Next one, which is number 4, is a little book, but it packs a hell of a punch, and that is the Hay Bale by Priscilla Bettis. This one is a short read, but I mentioned in my review and this one stuck with me because of the subject, and it really spoke to me. So the Hay Bale, it's a story about a hay bale. It's like I think you could call it folk horror. But it is, it spoke to me in a way personally that, not many books do. So that's the Hay Bale. So it is, it's hard to say too much about it because, I don't want to ruin it. It's a novella. It's a short one, but, it, like I said, it packs a heck of a punch, and it is a powerful book, for me, especially. And, kind of the things that I've been through. So, that I've been involved, that have happened in, to us personally. So the Hay Bale, it is like I said, it's a short book, but a very powerful punch, and it develops characters. It develops, all this tension, all this very heavy subject matter. It develops it in a very, very short period of time. And after reading Dogmeat by Priscilla Bettis, she has a skill for writing. She is a very skilled writer, and she can develop in a very short period of time. And so the Hay Bale, like I said, a very, very impactful read, and it's stuck with me. I still think about it. So let's move on. The next one is number 5, which is Edge of the Breach. Specifically, I want to mention Edge of the Breach specifically, but the Rift Cycle as a whole, the Rift Cycle by Halo Scott. The first book is, it's almost like a mix of Star Wars and Dune mixed together with like like a crime lord and powers and these other factions and this big mystery. Basically, what the breach is, it's a hole that is in the world, and the characters live in like a desert dune style world, and you start to learn about what the rift is, about what the breach is. You start to learn what happened, what caused it. There are, for whichever season you're born in, you are different. You can develop different powers. So some people develop really powerful powers. Some people don't. It just depends on when you're born and kind of how how you develop. So we follow a couple of characters, and when I say that these books are extremely violent, they are it does not pull any punches. There's some very dark and crude humor, but this is Edge of the Breach specifically was one that will stick with me for a while. The whole series is great, but specifically Edge of the Breach, what it develops, what the story it's telling, the world it brings, the characters, the inner dialogue for one of the characters specifically was so. It was like following around a serial killer. It's like you're in the head of a serial killer, and or like this like a superhero serial killer, or like a superhero villain almost, that you can hear their inner dialogue and think, hear what they're thinking. And it's hilarious. It is violent. It is dark, but I will say the end of the series really had me, really got me on that last book. The message at the end of it got me. That one got me. I don't get too emotional too often, but that book, the end of that one, that the message that Hala was conveying to the readers, and so good stuff. And we also break the fourth wall in those books too. The characters talk to you sometimes, the reader. So good one. Now the next one is another novella, and sometimes novellas can stick out for you. Sometimes novellas, even though they're short, they can pack a hell of a punch, like I mentioned. The next one is Orchards by Catherine Silva. This is a follow-up to her previous book, The Wild Dark. So I would highly recommend reading The Wild Dark first. It is a great book. It would be on this list, but I read it in 2021. But Orchards is a sequel novella to one of the characters, what they go through after the events of The Wild Dark. So don't read Orchards until you've read The Wild Dark. Otherwise you'll spoil the fate of some of the characters for you. But without giving too much away, it's like someone's life is a record, and someone is picking up the stylus and dropping it on different parts of the record, and you are experiencing memories of someone. It's almost like you're peeking into their memory, into their brain, and you're reliving moments in their life. And because of your connection to them from The Wild Dark, it hits on a different level. It could, because of the way that you experience this person's memories and kind of their past events that tie in to The Wild Dark. But great little book. Again, it's a short one, but it packs a heck of a punch. Another one that's it's kept me thinking. These are the ones that I keep thinking about long after I read them. Some of these books I really love, but these are the books on this list that made me think. I haven't forgotten about them. I still think about it. So that's the criteria for this list. The next book that I want to mention, and I'm losing track of which number, but almost halfway through, which is The Hand That Casts the Bone by H.L. Tinsley. It's the second book in the Vanguard Chronicles. This one, this is the second book. This is the follow-up to Wee Man of Ash and Shadow, which was another great book that I read in 2021. I was thankful and fortunate enough to get an ARC for The Hand That Casts the Bone. I was able to read it early. And this one, in this second book, I felt that Holly Tinsley, or H.L. Tinsley, you just feel it's like confidence oozing off the page, like with her writing, with her storytelling, with her characters. I felt like this confidence in the story was very deliberate, and it felt like confident to me. It felt like it felt very deliberate. So it's a mix of like gaslamp fantasy, grimdark, And I like to say it's a little bit of like a Guy Ritchie movie, kind of like that kind of humor, like that dark, again, droll humor. You may be noticing a pattern with me, but I think like a Guy Ritchie movie kind of humor, kind of this dry humor. That's the kind of humor that you get in The Hand That Casts a Bone, and it's another one that's kept me thinking long after I read it. And I love the low fantasy stories. I'm starting to learn that I really love those low fantasy, boots on the ground kind of stories generally. There's other ones that are more epic in scale, like Gunmetal Gods. That's more than just boots on the ground, and it's a little bit more of a higher fantasy, but I typally gravitate towards those, and this hits all the marks for me. Now, the next one is another book that I read that's, again, kept me thinking long after I've read it, which is The Winter Road by Adrian Selby. This one is a standalone. You can read it on its own. It's the second book. This is the second published book from Adrian Selby. Now, the first book is Snakewood. The second book is The Winter Road. And the third book is Brother Red. So you can read it in that order, or you can read it in whichever order you want. I just finished Brother Red. And I will say I wish I would have read Snakewood first, because I still have to read Snakewood. But there are things in Brother Red that I felt like I could appreciate more because I'd read The Winter Road, because I knew the connections. And it's not very heavy-handed, but there's little things that you can pick out and you can say, oh, that's that person, or they're talking about this event. So it's not huge. You can read them out of order, but I would say if you're going to jump into that, I would say read them in order. But The Winter Road is a story about someone wanting to bring trade to a certain area that's been previously off limits. I mean, this is like this isolated section of the world, and someone sets out to start trade. And they deliberately go out, put themselves at risk. Their mission is to introduce trade to these different areas, and they soon learn that these different areas that are being ruled by other factions. So I won't say too much, but they run into lots of resistance and lots of violence and lots of people not wanting to change the status quo. And you start to question, should people go and change other people's way of life because that's what they want to do? Who are we to choose for other people? I mean, who are we to do that? So there's all these different questions you ask yourself during that story, but it circles around two characters and their journey. But this one kept me thinking, like I said, about life, about love, about family, about getting older, about how we have all these different twists and turns in life, and just where we end up at the end. And so all these things, very, very powerful book that, again, it's been one that I've thought a lot about, and it's one of my favorites. It would be on one of my favorite reads lists. This is up there with one of my favorites all time. It is that good. So The Winter Road by Adrian Selby. If you haven't read it, you should. It is a low fantasy, but there's lots of other aspects to it. It's not so low fantasy. There's other things that are into the story that you can, there's other things to it. There's a big world that he's building there, but it is like lower fantasy, like there, but it is there are some tough scenes in that one, and you may start to see a pattern with tough scenes in books that I love, because that was one that had a few hard to read scenes, but it all serves a story. It is for a purpose, and it's not just shock value or just to surprise you. I mean, it's there for a reason. So speaking of tough reads, the next book that I want to mention is Saraphina's Lament by Sarah Chorn. Sarah, you may know her as she's a prolific blogger, editor, author. She does a little bit of everything. I'm not sure how she manages all of it, but Saraphina's Lament, Sarah has a kind of a unique writing style that is has a poetic twist to it. So it took me a little bit to kind of adjust to it, not in a bad way. Just had to kind of like adapt to her prose. But Seraphina's Lament is a story about a world that is desolate, and there is a kingdom that rules with an iron fist. And it's about people who are trying to change that, and you start to learn about the history of the world, about the king, and this is a book that you can read. And again, there's one scene in this book. There's one scene in this one that when I read it, is a character death. When I read it, I had to set the book down and walk away and just take a break. And that never happens. That never happens to me. But in this one, the way that it builds to this moment, and you start to wonder, someone's gonna come, and this is all gonna be okay. You think that to the very point where it happens, and you think, oh, okay, I guess no one's coming. That's the kind of book this is. No one's coming to save you. And yeah, so at the end of this book, you get to the end, and you have a certain idea for what the story is, and then you get to the end, and the last few bits of the book, the events that happen or the things that are revealed at the end, you start to wonder, there's a bigger story here that I hadn't really considered or I hadn't really thought about. But you start to you realize that it's a bigger story than you thought it was at the end, if that makes sense. Again, I won't give anything away, but it's one of those that kind of you think, oh wow, I didn't think of that. So one of those. But Seraphina's Lament by Sarah Chorn. The next one is a book that I think is one of the most disturbing books I've ever read. It is a mind-twisting, disturbing book, and this is one that there's I think it's hard to convey. This one has some very cinematic horror scenes, and it's very vivid in the presentation of certain scenes. There's some dream sequences, and there's some characters that we develop. There's themes of religion, of current generations, of technology, of growing up, of getting into adulthood. And the book I'm talking about, I should probably mention, is Negative Space by B.R. Yeager. It's a crazy, wild, mind-bending book, and you can see kind of where the threads are, and I don't know that anyone really knows everything that happens. There's so many things that happen. There's so many little things sprinkled in that I don't know if maybe I'm just not very smart, which one commenter mentioned in my Negative Space video, which, I can't argue with that. But anyway, so this one is something else. Now, I think Pax Panic mentioned this during her review of this one, that this isn't one that's for everyone. I think you have to have a certain kind of, certain expectations. You have to kind of know what you're getting into. It is again, it's a crazy, wild book that's just begging to be reread. I think I'm going to have to reread it because there's so much that just, I want to explore again, but really, really, really great stuff. The next one, I think, there's something that I never expected to happen, but a line from one of my reviews made it into the banner for this one on Amazon, which blew my mind because that's never happened before. Who cares what I think, right? But it ended up being a banner on Amazon, one of my quotes, which was absolutely heartbreaking. I think you're starting to see a pattern with me. Yeah. But the book I'm talking about is Obsidian Awakening by Sienna Frost. I do have an interview with Sienna Frost. We do have a spoiler-filled discussion about this book, get into the details, and there's a whole lot that Sienna Frost added to this book that's going to set up later books later in the series. Now, Obsidian Awakening is, I hate to compare things to Game of Thrones because everyone does that. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever. But it is that kind of political maneuvering. They all kind of, they all have these different perspectives, and these characters, some of them are held against their will. And it's that type of story without saying it's like Game of Thrones, but it's in a different, kind of a different style. And one of my favorite all-time fantasy characters is in this book. And apparently it's not very many other people's, does that make sense? It's not very many other people's favorite character, but it is one of mine. There's some heartbreaking scenes in this one. that yeah. Some of the themes that really stood out to me in this one was leadership. Uh, Being a leader can be really lonely. It can be a very difficult place to be because we explore, how does a ruler keep control of a city, or how does a ruler keep control of its people? How does a ruler keep control of keeping everyone obedient, I guess you can say, without letting chaos take over? You have to make these really hard decisions, and you have to weigh each one and decide what's more important, and what decision do you make for the greater good or for the end goal. And they're not always easy decisions, and you're second guessed and you're questioned, and it can be a lonely place. Not that I've ever had to make those kind of decisions, but I think you know what I mean. But those are the kind of themes it explores. It explores themes of, you go through these really difficult times and you come out the other end of it, and you decide if you're going to stay broken or if you're going to build yourself back up. Are you going to be broken forever? Are you going to let what happens to you break you? Or are you going to come back stronger than you were before? Those are the kind of things that stood out to me in this. And there's some lines in this one that were very inspiring to me. That kind of you want to kind of put on the wall somewhere, just because it really inspires you, just not only when you're reading, but just in life, in everyday life in general. But Obsidian Awakening, a really great book, and I believe the second book is being written now, so it's not too late to hop on and enjoy it. Now, the next one is by someone who I really love his writing, and I always mispronounce his last name, but it is Brian Bowyer, Bowyer, which is Flesh Rehearsal by Brian. Let's say Brian. But it is, this book is a bonkers book. It's another one that is super violent. It is not for the tame of heart. It's extreme horror. There's some characters in here that do some awful things. And it is another just mind-bending book that just wild, crazy things happen that you'd never expect to happen. I mean, it's just this like this crazy runaway train that you hop onto, and you just hold on until the end. But a lot of people have described Brian's style as like minimalistic, or and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a positive way. His books are really easy to read, and it's very to the point, very direct. It's very easy to get into it. It's not very fluffy. It's not a lot of extra words. It's not very flowery. It is just, you go through the story beat by beat. And I appreciate that about those books, because this book it could have easily been double the size for the story it tells, but it tells it in a very direct way. And I appreciate that about this one. But a wild book. If you're not into extreme horror, then it may not be for you, but if you want to dip your toes into it, pick up any one of Brian's books, and you'll be taken on a wild train ride. Just hold on tight. Now the next one is another trilogy that I want to mention, because I read 2 of the 3 books this year. I think I read one last year, maybe not. Either way, The Prince of Nothing by R. Scott Baker is a series that I want to mention. This one, Baker has, these books are full, packed. Every word is heavy. Every word packs a punch. Every word is meaningful. There's nothing wasted in these books. Everything is very deliberate. Everything is there for a reason. And you start to learn that very quickly. I read The Darkness That Comes Before for the second time this year, and it was like a totally different book the second time I read it. There's just so much in that book, that so much philosophy and world building and characters and war, and all of it is just building in this book. And it's hard to catch all of it. There's so much. And the prologue to The Darkness That Comes Before, I am done with the trilogy. We're into the second series, and the prologue we still reference, because the prologue has so much in it that you still refer back to it for the prologue for this one. Just wild stuff. Very, very thick, very, very heavy. but it's about a holy war, and it is loosely based, I think, on the Crusades. But it is there's some more aspects of horror in this series too that I think more horror readers should try. I think if you're into horror and want to try fantasy and are willing to dip into something dense and thick and violent and dark, then I think you'll enjoy Baker's work. It can be very, very troubling. Again, not a series that's for everyone. I don't think I kind of know what you're going into before you dip into that one if you are thinking about it. But we did have, I think part of what added to my enjoyment of this one is the podcast we're doing with Daniel and Katarina. We meet every Friday to discuss about 100 pages of these books, and we've been meeting like clockwork almost every week for a while now, and that's really helped me understand what the heck is going on and catch things that I just didn't catch. So that's been a great, great experience, and it's really added to my enjoyment. If you are someone who wants to read this one, the podcast is there on my channel. If you want to reference that as you're reading, and to try and help you, guide you on your journey through this story. But yeah, wild stuff. Really, really good stuff. If you don't listen to the podcast, I do recommend reading it with someone to kind of bounce ideas off of or discuss certain things with, because it's easy to get lost in that one. The next series I want to mention is Empires of Dust by Anna Smith Spark. This one, I wish I didn't read the synopsis for the first book, because I felt like it ruined something for me. And those of you who know me a little bit know that I typically don't like to read the synopsis for books. I like to go into them not knowing anything. And there's something in the synopsis that I wish I hadn't known going into this one, just because I felt like it would have been a cool thing to discover at the time. So I won't reveal too much about it, but it is about our character. It's again about, there's some political maneuvering. There's some cultures. There's some empires, of course, but how they keep control, how they maintain their different customs, about all this different maneuvering and backstabbing and double crosses, and all the while there's a character who comes from a family who has certain special abilities, let's say, and that person is building an army, basically, and we follow that journey. And if you're someone who needs a character to latch onto, to enjoy, to root for, this may not be for you, because there's not very many good characters in this series at all. They're all pretty bad people. Almost all of them. They're either just bad people, or they're in a very bad circumstance that converts them to a bad person. So that's one that it's a hell of a book. The third one especially, there's a battle at the end of the third book that it's a long battle, but the end of that battle took a lot out of me. It gave me a little bit of a hangover after, kind of like I need a break. It is very, very impactful. It sticks with you. The end of that last book, it is something. It is something else. It is something very, very impactful. Very, very, but that's what, we had a spoiler discussion with Anna Smith Spark about the series. And, that's what she was trying to do. She was trying to make it impactful and make you think, and to have that heavy feeling, that heavy impact on you at the end. And even she said she had to take a break after writing those scenes, because it was pretty heavy stuff. And not to say that the rest of the series isn't good. There's some other really great scenes that really have made me think back on them. And Anna Smith Spark's writing style especially it took me a little bit to get used to it. It has a different feeling to it, a different feel to it. It is, it's like a poetic, very like lyrical type of storytelling. And the action scenes especially are just some of my favorites. The action scenes don't focus on, okay, I'm swinging my sword, I'm blocking it with a shield, and whatever. It's you are in the mind of the person who's in the battle, and as you're in their mind, you are experiencing what they're experiencing in their mind. It's almost like when you're in a pressure situation, you get this tunnel vision and everything slows down, and you focus on something that's happening, and everything goes into slow motion, and you just the way you experience these events. That's kind of the way you experience the combat in these books, and I'm not sure how she does it, but I mean, loved it from the first combat scene. I think it's very it's very early in the first book. It was like, wow, this is great. So yeah, again, if you want characters to latch onto, this may not be for you. Now, the last book I want to mention, which by no means is the last on the list. This one, this one may be. This is another one of my all-time favorites. It is so good, and it doesn't feel like an 800-page book, but it is, which is The Wall of Storms. It's the second book in the Dandelion Dynasty series. The first book is The Grace of Kings, and that book has more of a historical approach to it. You kind of learn about the history, about characters, all the things the first book does, all the things it sets up for the first book, all the characters it develops, all the history, all the factions, all these major events, all those things in the second book. It's almost like all these seeds are planted in the first book. You're planting seeds everywhere, and in the second book, they all sprout. And there's so many moments in The Wall of Storms. There's so many great characters. There's so many great, just blows my mind that people can write books this good. I mean, it is next level. It is something else. But it is another book that it was hard to go on after that one, because it's just so good. I love seeing things like cultures clashing, different cultures coming together, and the way they see each other, and this very fragile feeling of peace, and what can tip that scale in one way or another. How do you handle people who don't speak your language, who see you as a threat immediately because they're trying to protect themselves? The characters from the first book, that how they're seen later in the series. So The Wall of Storms is one of my favorite all-time books. It is so good. It is just so good. So I can't say enough good things about that one. It is just, I mean, it's a great book, great book. And it is, it doesn't, like I said, there's some more really heartbreaking scenes in it, of course, because that's apparently what I like. And there's some deaths and some things that happen that I didn't expect to happen so early. But you can tell that this series is evolving. There's an evolution happening, and I really respect that. We don't get stuck on one set of characters, or in one event, or in one time in history. You are seeing this evolution from the Grace of Kings through The Wall of Storms. This evolution of this culture, of this world, of these people, of this, of all this that we're developing. It is just, I can't say enough good things about it. So those are the 15 books that have defined 2022 for me. I hope if you have read any of these, let me know down below if you've enjoyed any of them. I hope you pick up a couple of books off this list if you decide to. If not, then that's cool too. But yeah, really, really great stuff. So let me know down below what your favorite books of this year, or whatever, last year, 2022 were. And I'm not huge on I like hearing the end of the year stuff, because it's fun to hear, kind of what everyone thought, and it's a way for me to get new suggestions. But it's kind of like a reset button, I guess. So yeah, in that sense, I guess it's cool. So I'm enjoying. I wanted to share more books this year than last year. More things I enjoyed, because I feel like and I could have added more to this list, but these are the 15 that really stuck out to me, that really kept me thinking long after. So again, thank you for watching. Let me know down below what your favorites of this year were, and until next time, I will talk to you soon, and Happy New Year.